Palden Sawe Lama Rinpoche Daki Chiwar Pede Denjula Kadran Chempo Goni Jason Te Kusung Tuki No Drip Saldu Sol. Good morning.
Good morning.
And I'm happy to see all of you here today, and I'm very pleased to be here. As I said last night, I really see a strong need for these teachings, and I'm very pleased to be able to give them. And I appreciate being invited to Gainesville to give these teachings here. It's important, anytime you listen to any Dharma teaching, it's important to have the motivation that you are listening to these so that you can be of more benefit to other beings. Or let's put that differently, more benefit to all sentient beings, because you are a sentient being too. And that's important. That it might seem contradictory, but you really do have to take care of yourself and learn how to be compassionate and kind to yourself if you're going to be kind and compassionate to other people. It doesn't work the other way around. Oh, if I'm just kind enough and compassionate enough, then everything will be all right with me at home and with my relationships and da-da-da-da-da-da-da. It never works that way. Now, you've had some meditation this morning, and I like to do these programs to begin with meditation, and then have the interviews, and then have a talk, and then we'll all go out somewhere, have a nice meal, come back and do some more meditation, and then another talk. And Lama Losang, his dog had cancer surgery yesterday, and he had to go to pick up his dog. It went very well, he said. But he'll do a little Qigong work this afternoon too. I've developed this kind of a format. As I said last night, I started out doing this in the prison when I was a prison chaplain, and it worked so well there, I figured I'd time to take it onto the road. And again, I have been very pleased with how it has worked in other parts outside of prison. Now, the reason why meditation is so important is that meditation helps our mind to settle down. And when our mind settles down, even if it's just a little bit, we become more receptive to the teachings, and we start seeing ourselves a little more clearly. And really, that's what the Dharma is. We're talking about having compassion for all living beings, but what it means is it's an inner journey looking in. You go in to go out. And so we start seeing how our own mind operates. And it might be a little scary sometimes, and it might seem like you're just having nothing but one thought after another, and the meditation isn't getting anywhere at all. But that's not the case. You're actually practicing, and you're gradually learning to tame your mind. And mind is where our emotional problems lie. Mind is where the trauma lies. Mind is where the fear lies. We can store it in our body, but basically it's primarily our mind, that our mind decides what we're going to say, Our mind decides what we're going to do. Our body just doesn't all of a sudden do something independent of mind. If it's a motivational action, at least. And so mind is the core of what we look into here with emotions and trauma and so forth. And what happens is that our minds hold on to what's happened in the past. The present lasts about that long. It's always present. It's always changing. You never know what's going to happen. But our mind holds on to what's happened in the past and thinks about it, develops habitual patterns about it, and carries it into the present. But the Tibetans say the past is like a rotten seed. Nothing can grow from it. The past is absolutely over with. You cannot go back and change what's happened in the past. There are science fiction books and movies about such things, but it remains in the realm of science fiction. And likewise, the future hasn't happened yet. The Tibetans say the future is like the child of a barren woman. The child of a woman that cannot have children. So we're stuck with the present. But we live in the past. We fill up our minds with all kinds of plans for the future. And there's no time for the present. We just keep busy with the present. With usually activity that isn't so important. And with the advent of digital equipment, it's amazing how busy we can be in the present. But it is in the present where freedom lies. It is in the present where we make decisions. Am I going to go this way? Am I going to go that way? Am I going to hold on to what's happened in the past? Am I going to hold on to what's coming up in my mind? Or am I going to let go with it? Am I going to engage in virtuous activity, or am I going to go in the other direction and engage in a little non-virtue? Usually we don't think about these things. It's a habitual sort of thing, and it's just a gut reaction. But if we look at it more closely, we do have freedom. With mindfulness, with taming our mind, there is an instant where you can say, no, I'm not going to go that direction. I'm not going to engage with the fear. I'm not going to engage with the anger and so forth. Here's a good example. So you were in New York City and you're at a bus stop and a bus stops. Don't you want to look at where the bus is going before you get on? Mm-hmm. You could end up in places you do not want to be. But the first thought that comes into our mind, and we get on and ride it. But with mindfulness, with some wisdom, you can realize that you have a choice in the present whether you're going to get on that bus. Because there are a lot of places you don't have to go and you don't want to go. So what I'm going to be talking about really is freedom. Empowering yourselves rather than being a slave to your thoughts and your habitual patterns, your neurosis. I brought up neurosis last night. Maybe I should read a definition of that again. The idea is that we're all neurotic. And Neurosis is a relatively mild mental illness that is not caused by organic disease, involving symptoms of stress, depression, anxiety, obsessive behavior, hypochondria, but not a radical loss of touch with reality. And of course, the mindfulness puts us in touch with that reality a little better. Nothing wrong with being in touch with reality. So, what you find when you meditate is that there is this conversation going on. It seems like it's an endless conversation that's going on. It's actually not a conversation, it's a monologue. I should cross out conversation and put monologue, because you're just listening to this voice inside that's telling you all kinds of things. It's called subconscious gossip. In some traditions they call it monkey mind. You could even look at it as a spin doctor, because it's always spinning experience and memories in the past in a certain way, trying to convince you of something or another. It's not factual. It's really not realistic. And it will be talking about things like fear, hope, plans, anger, jealousy, all the poisons. A lot of times that there are places that are too painful and too scary to even go. And those don't even come up. And these other things come up instead. I've done carpentry, and you're pounding the nail and you hit your thumb with a hammer. What do? You throw the hammer and you start yelling, because it's too painful to think about that thumb. Yeah, well, that's what we do with our emotions. It's the same thing. These scary, painful places, we cover them up with other things. Whether it be compulsive behavior, shop till you drop, alcohol, drugs, anger, and so forth. We cover them up. But what we have to do, we have to go into those scary places. We have to see what is there. And once we see it and understand it, that's where freedom lies, because then it no longer controls us. I had an interesting experience out at Karmeling. Karmeling is a 3-year retreat center. And Rinpoche, there's a house there where Rinpoche lives. And I went out there for a visit and had lunch with a small number of people, including Rinpoche. I felt very blessed that I could be part of this meal. But at the end of the meal, we all got a fortune cookie. One of his Chinese students donated a box of fortune cookies. And when I say a box of fortune cookies, I mean a box of fortune cookies. And so we just kind of reached in there, and the luck of the draw, so to speak. And my fortune cookie happened to say, to see your drama is to be liberated from it. I don't think that was an accident. I think he has enlightened fortune cookies. But that is the truth. With mindfulness, you can start seeing the drama, and when you see the drama, you realize it's just drama. It's nothing more than drama. And that brought to mind a scene from The Wizard of Oz. And I went on YouTube and watched this scene the other day just to make sure that, and my memory wasn't quite as good as the actual. But this is where Dorothy and her friends go up to and enter the wizard's palace. And in one, they're in this big hall, and there's flames shooting up in one end of this big hall, and the Tin Man and the Lion are shaking like this, and they're all scared, and he's going, "I am the wizard," and it's just really frightening. And then Toto, the little dog, runs over to this curtain and pulls the curtain back, and there you have this old man pulling levers and speaking into a microphone, saying, "Don't pay attention to the man behind the curtain." Yeah, you know the scene. Well, that's what I'm talking about here. With mindfulness, you pay attention to the man or the woman behind the curtain that's pulling the levers, that's scaring you, because it's you. And when you realize that, suddenly it's not so scary anymore. That's when you're liberated from it. So to use another 21st century word, when you start seeing how this mechanism works, you do reverse engineering. Maybe you're familiar with reverse engineering. Yeah, this is reverse engineering. It's interesting how we usually have no trouble seeing these kinds of mistakes that other people make. And we're very good at telling them what we think they should do to correct their mistakes. Now it's time for us to look into the mirror and do the same to us. And when you start seeing how this happens, then you've always got a choice. You always have a choice, and the choice is this. Oh yeah, I'm making more mistakes. It proves I'm a bad person. Or, oh, I'm making a mistake. I don't have to do this anymore. You've always got that choice. And usually the safe, secure place is, oh, it proves I'm a bad person, that I'm always screwing up. That's the safe, comfortable place. And that's the place of just going right back to where you started from. You have to realize that if you're going to do house cleaning, you've got to see the dirt. And seeing the dirt is good. And now here comes my famous saying of the manure of our experience. That this is manure, but it is useful. It's a resource. It's very fertile. This is how you grow, is seeing it and then using it, rather than wallowing in it, walking in it, smelling it. That's what you need to do. That's part of the drama, yes. There are lots of, we can have lots of different roles in this drama, in this soap opera. One of them is, poor me, I am such a bad person. I'm always screwing up. And in fact, that leads right into what is coming. But does that answer your question? Yeah? And for those of you that weren't here last night, I encourage you to interrupt me with questions and comments. This is more of a group discussion here, with me throwing things out to get you to be thinking. So thank you for interrupting. So what I'm going to do here is kind of jump ahead a little bit. I was debating what order I would be presenting this in. But so here, many of you have heard of the 8 worldly dharmas. And a very important one is blame. There's pairs of opposites, praise and blame. I'm going to go into blame because, as you pointed out, we blame ourselves. When we run into obstacles and difficulties, whether it be trauma or anything else, when obstacles arise, and this is samsara, and the nature of samsara is suffering, we blame ourselves frequently. That it's my fault. That there is something fundamentally wrong with me. I usually screw up. I can't do things right. I'm helpless. I'm hopeless. I am supposed to be perfect, and I'm not. And then you've got all this guilt that you wallow in. An example, this is an extreme example, but what brought me to Buddhism was when my best friend was killed instantly on a city street by being run over by a Caterpillar road grader. Yeah, it was pretty traumatic. This is one of the things that got me interested in trauma, by the way. And his widow, she blamed herself for his death. It's called survivor's guilt. I didn't know about it at the time, but after witnessing it, it was pretty obvious. And she was not with him when it happened, and of course her thoughts were that if I would have been with him when it happened, I would have been able to stop the accident. I would have been able to warn him, So she was racked with guilt. And this is a very easy road to travel, blaming yourself when things go wrong. It's called guilt. Now, it's survivor's guilt, but it's just plain guilt, no matter what the situation is. So you've done something wrong, something non-virtuous. A lot of times what you get guilty about has nothing to do with virtue or non-virtue. You get guilty about playing games at work, ego games, competition with your fellow workers. You know, I'm losing this game. What's the matter with me? Yeah. But anyway, when difficulties arise, we start seeing things that we have done that are wrong, sometimes non-virtuous, sometimes just ego games. And then we go down this road of guilt. And it is, and I've done these other things wrong in the past, and I'm such a bad person, and I'm so guilty, and I can't do anything right, and I feel helpless, and I feel hopeless, and I don't even want to get out of bed now. It's so terrible. But the proper response would be remorse, which is recognizing that you've done something wrong, and then realizing that it can be purified, and then you can make the aspiration that I don't ever want to do this again. Case closed, and let go of it. Guilt is hanging on to the past really tightly and then using it as a weapon against yourself. Well, you can learn from your mistakes, but you have to realize that the past is past. And to let go of punishing yourself about it. There's a huge difference between learning from it and punishing yourself from it. Now I like to tell Rinpoche stories because I was pretty good at this. I mean, really good. I excelled in this. I was so good in it that after my best friend was killed, I went into depression, was sleeping 14, 16 hours a day, seeing a psychiatrist, taking an antidepressant medication. I'm going to get into depression a little later because this is one of my specialties. But anyway, in retreat, I went into that mode of guilt for days. And one day at breakfast, maybe Rinpoche knew from my body language, but I think it was just because of his super mundane abilities, meaning that he can tell what's on your mind. So I walked by him at breakfast. He was sitting at the head of the table. And I'm going to have to do this to each side individually. So as I walk by him, he's sitting on a chair, and he goes like this. He looks at me, and he goes. What he did is he went like this. And I started laughing because it was so silly. And that's all it took for me to realize I was beating myself up, and it was totally unnecessary. Even before I entered retreat, when I started to see this pattern, I hung up a little poster that I made on my bulletin board in my kitchen, and it read this: the beatings will continue until morale improves, the management. And I'm living alone, and people would come over and look at that. Well, we have that internal manager that is continually beating us up. And that's that man or woman behind the curtain that you need to pay attention to and realize you don't have to pay attention to those messages that voice is giving you. I can tell from the laughter here that none of you are familiar with this voice. The thing is that blame is just a worldly concern. It has nothing to do with spirituality. It is just more kleshas. It's anger, is what it is. It's just anger. There's a difference between blame and responsibility. Responsibility empowers you. Blame takes away your power. Responsibility is good. It's important. So there you go. What do which way do you want to go when you've got that choice? Are you going to go down the blame game, or are you going to go with the responsibility that I can take responsibility and do what I can to avoid making this mistake in the future? In actuality, go ahead. Yeah, well, that's what I'm exactly talking about. Yeah, that when you're not responsible at all for it, then it's totally fictitious. It's totally fictitious. When you recognize that, let go of it as soon as possible. Because the problem with all of this is, with the blame, with the feeling that you can't do anything about it, it leaves you helpless and then hopeless, and it leaves you powerless. So when you see, let's say, an animal, because you work with an animal shelter, when you see an animal that has had a lot of suffering, yeah, you're not responsible for that suffering. And what you can do is you can help alleviate that animal's suffering. That empowers you. Oh, I can do something about this. But you can't go back in time and go back to the house where the animal came from and change what happened before they came in contact with you. You're not God. I'm sorry to tell you that. You're not a goddess either. You don't have the power to go and change those kinds of things. And so that's just fruitless. It's just fruitless. Well, yes. I'm continually seeing people that are suffering tremendously. And if only why don't they listen to me? Why don't they listen to me? Why don't they get it? But again, we don't have that kind of power. The Buddha could not enlighten everybody.
They help themselves.
Yeah, why not to listen to me?
Right.
Come on, I'm doing this for your own good. and like in the prison, there were just roughly 1,000 men there. Just a small handful would come to my programs. And of those, only a few would get it. You know, it's the way life is, unfortunately.
Yeah.
This is why Rinpoche has said this. You know, we were all alive at the time of the Buddha. We are the ones that are hard to liberate. You had a comment?
It seems to me that almost all of this is contingent on the ability to develop a witness, to be able to witness these workings in a spacious manner, not to be invested enough where one's trapped by them.
Mm-hmm.
So one has to have the ability to witness or cultivate that. Otherwise, these patterns continue. We get trapped again and again in them until we can separate ourselves enough not to be entangled to the point where we can't disentangle ourselves or free ourselves from them.
Yes, that's exactly right. Usually the word observer is used, but witness is fine too.
Yeah.
The idea is to watch, but as you say, do not get entangled. And that goes back to the sitting meditation where the thoughts can arise and you slowly train yourself to let go of the thoughts.
So your challenge, like when you were working in the prison system with these people, was to encourage them to begin to cultivate that sort of spaciousness. Otherwise, all the words in the world weren't going to
Exactly.
free them from their traps.
Exactly. It is not, this Dharma is not about intellectual knowledge. The Kagyus are called the practice lineage, the Karma Kagyus, because their approach is you need to take it into your experience. It's not about how many texts you've memorized. Now, it's good to do that, but if you're just parroting things and don't really understand it in your heart, you really haven't gotten very far. So yes, you have to bring it into your experience, understand it at a very deep level rather than an intellectual level. And the way I lead these programs is experiential. You know, but I'm not talking about sutras and commentaries and so forth. I'm talking about our experience, how we experience our minds and so forth. And that's great. You know, that's the way you really start learning it. And that idea of space is really important because what I was going to talk about next is Buddha nature, but Buddha nature is very, very spacious. There's lots of space. It's called emptiness. What could be more spacious than emptiness? And what emptiness is possibility. Room to grow, room to develop. In the Karmapa's latest book, he talks about zero. That it's similar to the concept of emptiness. Now, we're talking about concepts, not what actually is. But zero is nothing. Yet, with a lot of zeros and a lot of ones, our whole digital world exists. You know, that's just nothing but ones and zeros. Right now, nothing is happening, but it has the potential for just about anything to arise on that screen. And that's emptiness, it's space, it's potential. And when you start observing, that's when things start opening up, when you observe rather than attach to it. You start seeing that the classic example is the ocean, that the thoughts are the waves on the ocean, but the ocean is incredibly deep. The waves are only the surface of the ocean. The waves are part of the ocean. They come from the ocean. This is great for Florida. You understand this. In Wisconsin, we don't have the ocean. They didn't have it in Tibet either, but they still used it. That comes from the depths and then goes back. It's not separate, but it's only a small part of the ocean. This is my own analogy, but when I fly, I'm surprised at how small trees look. When I'm down on the ground and look up, they look very tall, but when you're at 20,000 feet, they look like nothing. They look like bumps, toothpicks. They look very short compared with the sky. And it's that kind of thing, that if we can more see the space and less the thoughts that arise in that space, the less we get seduced by the thoughts. We don't have that claustrophobia. And so that's a very important observation that you made. So I was talking about Buddha nature, and what this means is that all of us have this potential to become a fully enlightened Buddha. It doesn't matter what we've done, how old we are, what our sex is. None of that matters. It's a quality of mind. It's a potential of mind. And the path is very simply removing the obscurations. Buddha, the Tibetan word for Buddha is Sanjay, and it means to purify and to blossom. There we're back to the lotus again. That particular lotus, for instance. And so what is removed are all the obscurations and the impurities. And what blossoms is that potential. But we all have Buddha nature, and no matter what we've done, it cannot be altered or changed. All that can happen is it can be covered up, obscured, muddied, manured. In some of the classic, like in the Bodhisattva's way of life, they talk about being covered up in a heap of garbage. And I don't know what the Tibetan word is. Sometimes I think I've seen it translated a heap of filth, which seems more personal. But all we have to do is find it and clean it up, and bingo, let it grow. And so when we start looking at ourselves as being this helpless, hopeless pile of mistakes and guilt and bad actions and so forth, we're not seeing who we really are. We're listening to this spin doctor that's giving some very, very negative spin. I'm amazed at ego is so tricky that we want to excel, of course. We think we're great. And so when we are on the guilt trip, we think we are among the worst of the worst. We're so good at being bad that we're excelling in it. And there are probably no mass murderers here. I don't see anyone that looks like a mass murderer, but people can get so hard on themselves that they act like they were a mass murderer. It sounds bizarre when you when I say it. But pay attention to the words that you're telling yourself when you're down on yourself. And no, you probably haven't killed anybody. There are a lot of things that you could have done that you haven't. You're really not nearly as bad as you think you are. And you're also not nearly as good as you think you are either when you're going that direction. You know, it's your ego trying to tell you how you excel. And you're pretty probably more or less ho-hum. And so the mistake is that we are really a diamond and we look at ourselves like a lump of coal. And that we're trying to purify a lump of coal, which of course, no matter how much you wash it, it's still going to be a lump of coal. And so that's a fundamental mistake that you want to avoid. The other direction that we go is in terms of blame. This is just the first direction. We're very versatile. Sometimes we can go the other direction, which is, it's not my fault. I'm a victim. I've been screwed. I have nothing to do with this. I have no responsibility. I've just been screwed. And we feel that samsara is supposed to be perfect. And when things go wrong, we're a victim. I mentioned this, I think it was Thursday night, the 5 unrealistic expectations of samsara. So here's a repeat of those. The first unrealistic, this sounds like the Letterman show, I know. We have a little drum roll or something here. The first unrealistic expectation of samsara is that I am the most important person in the room. And in fact, the room could be a pretty big room, maybe the most important person in the state, or the country, or the world. And of course, there's something like 6 billion people that feel they're the most important person in the world. And you wonder why there are wars and people yell at each other and scream and fight. And this is why. Unfortunately, it's unrealistic to think you're the center of the universe. You're important, but you're no more important. You're not less important either. But we have Buddhist practices that kind of point you in that direction for a good reason, by the way. If I would take this paper and roll it up, and I try to lay it flat, it would remain curled up somewhat. We're in that shape. We're kind of bent out of shape because we're so attached to ego and thinking we're very important. So what Buddhist practice does is it turns it around the other way and rolls it up. And then when you let go of it, those two forces equalize each other and it lays flat again. So sometimes, you're down on the floor doing prostrations thinking that everybody else is higher than you. There's a good reason for that. It's humbling, and humility is really good. This counteracts this, I'm the most important person in the room. The second unrealistic expectation is, I should be respected. And I always think of Rodney Dangerfield when I read this, for those of you that are a little older. And so, again, I went to the dictionary to see exactly what respect means. And it is a feeling of deep admiration for someone elicited by their abilities, qualities, or achievements. And that is very telling. I should be respected because of my qualities, maybe the work I do, what I've achieved, who my children are, for you older people. And needless to say, I think all of you have run into people that don't respect you. Usually it doesn't take long before you run into somebody after you get up in the morning. Could be the person you're living with. Yeah, I can see you can relate to that. You know, that's why we have dogs.
Sometimes dogs don't respect you, though.
So that's another unrealistic expectation.
Another sentient being disrespected.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what. I had a dog that was a black lab, and if you want someone to respect you, get a black lab. You know what I'm talking about. Yeah, he would smile at me. I'd get up in the morning. I might not be able to smile, but he could smile at me. But that's another story. So I don't think I need to go into that. I should be respected. It just doesn't happen. But we get very upset when it doesn't happen. It's not supposed to be that way. I am supposed to be respected. I think it was Thursday night I talked in here. I heard Khenpo Tenkyong, the new Khenpo at KTD, talk about generosity. And I had never heard it quite this way before. He said respect is an aspect of generosity, giving other people respect. Just because they're not giving you respect doesn't mean you can't give them respect. By the way, I didn't ever say Dharma was easy. It's not easy being a bodhisattva. It's easy being a samsaric being. But the problem is being a samsaric being is painful. That's the problem. If you like pain, if you're into masochism, then stay in samsara. It's a great place for that. But I'm hoping that you realize that it's really not a great place to hang out.
I have a question.
Sure.
And it's the same question that I kind of keep trying to look for. It's hard to be in samsara, and being a bodhisattva is great, but the in-between seems even more painful.
Well, that's an interesting observation.
Because you don't get to get away with acting poorly.
Yeah.
And you're also not like there yet, so you're striving. And it's just like, I feel like I'm constantly calling myself on my behavior, and like, it's tiring. Holding yourself accountable is tiring.
Yeah. For some reason or other, cognitive dissonance came into my mind.
That is exactly the way I feel. That is how I feel.
Yeah.
Like all the time.
Pardon me for laughing. Thursday night, part of my talk was how healing humor is. And I do laugh a lot because it's healing. As I told you, the meetings will continue. You know, you laugh your way to health, mental health. So I'm not trying to mock anybody when I laugh. At least not purposely. But what you have to do is you're right, you're stuck. You're stuck partially relating to the samsaric way of relating to yourself in life. And then you want to be over here. And so when you realize that you're not over here, then you beat yourself up.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you got to quit beating yourself up.
Okay. I'm trying.
Yeah.
It's not easy.
I'm going to go into depression, and that's in a little while. I think it'll be this afternoon. When I prepare these things, I go, oh, I've got so much that I want to say, and I know I'll have plenty of time, and then I get into it, and it's like, how am I ever going to say all of this before Sunday afternoon ends? But beating yourself up is just more of blame and samsara. that you need to develop loving kindness for yourself. I did a whole weekend at KTD in July. The program was titled Loving Kindness and Compassion. Start with yourself. And tomorrow I'm going to go into this a little bit more. And this is an extremely important thing, is to become a kind, encouraging person. Don't pay attention to the drill sergeant. Become a kind, encouraging person that gives yourself a lot of space. That space word again. You need space to grow. When you are gardening, you plant, the carrot seeds are very, very small, and you mix them in with sand, and then you sow them, and even then they're too close together. You got to pull some of the carrots out so the others have room to grow. It's that simple.
Well, and what does space look like? Is that like shamatha?
Well, space is you're not having any judgmental thoughts. You're just seeing what's happening. You're observing. So we're back to you're observing. Here is an example. I think I used this the other night again. In a way, you want to become a very kind, loving, gentle parent that maybe you never had. You want to parent yourself. You want to grow up spiritually. And so a kind, loving parent watching a child learn to walk will let the child fall down. And maybe the child will fall down and hurt him or herself and cry, and won't take long, and you can't keep the child down and get back up and start walking again and falling. Now, on the other hand, if you would start yelling at the child every time it fell and tell how dumb it was, how stupid it was, and you'll never learn to walk and you're always screwing up. Huh? That's what you do to yourself. Watch. Watch and just watch. You might say, watch the magic happen. You don't have to. Another aspect that we really get concerned about is control. Again, I'm getting ahead of myself here. But with space, anything could happen. And it can be frightening. With control, we try to have a nice, tidy world, all boxed up with a ribbon around it. And then you feel safe. Suzuki Roshi has said an expert's mind has few possibilities. A beginner's mind is full of possibilities. You want to have possibilities. Plans, again, as I said Thursday night, are nothing but well thought out fantasies. And actually, when you start engaging those plans, you'll find a lot of them aren't even well thought out. It's like, what was I thinking? But they're just fantasies. The Tibetans talk more in terms of vision. This is where I want to go, and here are some possibilities to get there. But you're not going to know how you get there until you get there. Because of impermanence, it's a moving target. Things are always changing. You're always going to plan B, C, D. Sometimes it's like, I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm going to do something. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to be a victim.
Not being a victim is very appropriate. I think the nastiest part of the whole process is that most of us come to Dharma or some methodology designed to alleviate suffering, and yet we're forced to employ the very mechanism that creates our suffering to alleviate our suffering, the ego. Mm-hmm. Because that's all we have if we're caught in it. So we're asking the ego to diminish and eventually erase or dissolve the ego
Yep.
itself. So it becomes part of the game. And Trungpa Rinpoche often talked about how spiritual materialism, how the ego now is invested with all these nice devices to fortify itself very subtly in the so-called pursuit of dissolving itself. So for many of us, that's the biggest issue, is to find some kind of ground, maybe a neutral ground where ego can rest while it's doing the work of dissolving itself.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, it's cultivating that level of calmness or tranquility which allows the space from which to employ these methods without falling prey to spiritual materialism, if you will.
Yeah, well, he said that shamatha meditation is like putting sand in the gearbox of ego.
All right. It's,
It just slowly wears the gears down, and eventually the mechanism can't work anymore. Now, there's a lot more to it than shamatha, but he really stressed shamatha. I started out with his sangha. He really stressed shamatha. Rinpoche, Khenpo Kartar Rinpoche, he stresses more of these Vajrayana practices. They all work. Different people have different aptitudes and so forth. But I think shamatha is an excellent practice for, as you say, helping trick our ego.
wasn't it said that Vajrayana was really designed for those that already opened and to cultivate skillful means and deepen their wisdom?
I can't say that. I never entered the Vajrayana path, Trungpa Rinpoche Sangha. I started Nundro with Khenpo Rinpoche. Yeah. Once I met him, I was hooked. Once I met him, I became his student and did not pursue the Vajrayana path in Vajradhatu. Let me see here. I'm going down. I've got a half hour to do this, so I'm going to kind of hurry up here a little bit. Number 3 of these unrealistic expectations of samsara. Others should live up to my expectations. Yeah, doesn't this sound familiar? This is samsara. I'm just describing samsara, nothing more, nothing less. But this is unrealistic. I think you all know already that people do not live up to your expectations. I think you learned that about 3. Mom isn't treating me right. You know, at 2 years old, grabbing it, no. But we seem to think that they are supposed to live up to our expectations. And then we get angry when they don't, and we feel like we've been victimized when they don't. And then, this really gets into being a victim. Number 4 is, I shouldn't be harmed bodily or otherwise. Well, there's a lot of harm, bodily and otherwise, that occurs in samsara that other people do to us and do to each other. It's full of that. As I said last night, at least 1 in 4 women are sexually assaulted as children. 1 in 5 men assaulted sexually as children. College rape is in the news. I think they're saying 1 in 4 co-eds are sexually assaulted in college. Sounds a lot. And then there is all kinds of other bodily harm that can happen to you, either as a child or as an adult. It could be getting beaten up as a child or as an adult, getting in an accident, getting run over by a Caterpillar road grader. That shouldn't have happened. on and on and on. This is samsara. And when these things happen, it's like we're shocked, How can that be? How can that be? Last night, this reminds me, this is a little digression here, but it's a good one. It was brought up where I was talking about comparing your situation and how traumatic your situation has been compared to other people. And Lama Losong reminded me of this story. And that was when the Buddha was alive, a woman came to the Buddha with her dead infant and asked the Buddha to bring her infant back to life. And he said, well, I will do that if you can bring me a mustard seed from a house that no one has died in. And a mustard seed would be found in any house. It was just a common spice back in India. And every house that she went to, they would gladly give her a mustard seed. It was worth nothing. Mustard seeds are pretty small. But she could not find a house where nobody had died in. And so eventually she came back and told the Buddha, death is pervasive. And she realized his teaching, which was it's all over, that you are not the only one that has had an infant die or a loved one die, that it is all pervasive. And so, yes, looking at your situation and comparing it to others can be very helpful to see that you are not being singled out, that you are not unique, that you are not especially suffering. And then the last one, which I added, is that life should be fair. We all want life to be fair. Fair to us and fair to other people. It's easy to see this suffering going on and thinking, this is not fair. I think that all the time when I read the news. It's not fair for children to be assaulted. It's not fair for someone's country to devolve into total chaos and beheadings and crucifixions and so forth. But this is the nature of samsara. That this is the nature of samsara, and we, much as we would like to, we cannot make the world a fair, safe place to live. The Karmapa wants us to do things to help improve the world, but we have to realize we cannot clean up the world. We can help beings in the world, and no matter what we do, because of impermanence, it probably won't last. No matter how many animals you rescue, there's a limitless supply of new animals that are being abused. So we can't give up, but we have to realize our limitations. And this kind of goes back to what we were talking about too with other people, that we do what we can, but have to realize our limitations and not get discouraged by not being able to have a greater impact. So there's a slogan in the 7 Points of Mind training, which is always contemplate whatever causes resentment. So all of these assumptions can cause resentment. And so when resentment arises, it's good to start looking, where is the source of this resentment? What is the assumption that I'm making that is causing this? By the way, getting back to life being fair, if you throw karma into the mix of what has happened in previous lifetimes, and I cannot see karma, but people like His Holiness the Karmapa can see karma from previous lifetimes, then it becomes much more fair. But again, this does not mean that when bad things happen to you, go into this, oh, I'm just a bag of trash, I've done so many bad things. To be born a human being requires excellent karma. This is really important, that you have to have accumulated very good karma to be born a human being, but it is mixed with some bad karma. Well, karma can be purified. The only good thing about bad karma is it can be purified. And habitual patterns, there's two types of karma. Habitual patterns, and then the karma that's like a seed, which grows and bears fruit, and the fruit is suffering. And both can be changed and purified. And so I try to avoid, this is their karma, let them suffer. That's not bodhisattva conduct. But again, you might not be able to help them much because of how strong their karma is. Of course, yeah. Again, realizing your limitations. Yeah. A lot of heavy karma in prison. But I would try to treat the inmates with respect. I would try to keep cheerful. I said the other night, again, I said some things Thursday night and I said some things Friday night, but at Christmas time at the prison, I wore my robes. I would wear a Santa hat to boost morale. You know, at Christmas time, you think Christmas time can be depressing on the outside. Imagine on the inside, your family's abandoned you. Maybe you had a family member die that year. And here you are in prison. Poor me, no skills, no emotional skills. Most of these inmates were emotional infants. You know, there's this idea of emotional intelligence. You know, here's high, here's low, they'd be down here. And so, well, if I could wear a Santa hat and smile, some of them would actually laugh. Some of them would grin. You know what? So I'm doing something to ease their pain a little bit. You know, I like to make dumb jokes, so I'd say I'm the jolly Lama. You see, yeah, you're healthier already having laughed. Anyway, with all of this blame, we're not taking any responsibility for our own feelings. And here again, a good example of blame. I think you all can think of many ways that you play a victim. It could be with sexual assault when you were a child. I'm a victim of sexual assault. Well, the thing is, it happened maybe 20, 30, 40 years ago. Maybe you were a victim at that time, but now you have a choice. Are you going to hold on to what's happened in the past that's no longer happening? You're not being sexually assaulted in the present. You're never going to be a child again in this lifetime that's sexually assaulted. It's in the past, but you're holding on to it. I'm a victim now. I'm a victim now. So you're giving up your responsibility to do something about it. You become helpless and hopeless, powerless. It's a dead end. It's a dead end. You've given up your responsibility. Here is another example. I'm going to use my sister. who has lived in Manhattan for many years. She is not living there now, but she came up at Christmas time to visit my folks and me, and we went to an art museum in Minneapolis. She had a rental car, and when we were done at the art museum, she came back out and her car was gone. I had driven in my car was there, but her car was gone. And so, well, where was it? And it was right there. And right above was no parking after 4 o'clock. This was 4:30. And she went on, you know, in Manhattan, they would just line up the tow trucks, and then as soon as it was that time, they would start towing them. Yada, 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 yada. You know, they should have waited for her before they towed her car, you know. It was their fault that she got towed, not her fault for parking in a no parking zone or coming late. And so then I said, well, were you ever towed in Manhattan? Oh yeah, a couple times. You know, I saw what was going on. She didn't have a clue. She was just mad. But we all do that. We all do that in some way or another. Then we get mad. We don't have any responsibility for being where we are. We're powerless. We're helpless. It's a very comfortable place to be. It's usually pretty familiar too. You know, we'll specialize either in being guilty and powerless and hopeless and bad, or else being a victim, that I have nothing to do with this. I get this part from Traumatized Rinpoche, and he says this is like an epidemic in the United States, this being a victim. Just giving up your power. In case you're wondering, it's on page 5, 6, and 7. And it's even online. This part of the book is online. If it's Lojong by Traumatized Rinpoche, you can go 5, 6, and 7. It's a very interesting 2 pages because it's on part of 5 and 7. Yeah, this is what I like about Buddhism, by the way. Yeah, it's different and it works. Wait till I get into what the nature of thought is in the future, by the way, because that's what all this is thoughts. 20 years ago it doesn't exist, it's only thoughts. So what are thoughts? I'll let you think about that over lunch. Okay, here, here's another example of exactly what you're talking about. There was an inmate that I worked with that had been sexually abused as a child. And of course he had a real anger problem. We called it anger management problem. That's what they said in psych services. And so he would say, this is what happened to me. I can't do anything about what happened to me, therefore I can't change. Yeah, and there he was stuck. And after a few months, they sent him to a maximum security prison because he couldn't control his anger. And when you can't control your anger in prison, then they put you up to a higher level of security. But in effect, he was just playing a victim. He was giving up his power. Again, it's a very comfortable place to be in. It's familiar. You'll get a lot of support from outside of you, from other people, from the system, and so forth. But it's a dead end. It's a nowhere place. In terms of other people, we cannot prevent our suffering by controlling other people. We all try that sometime or another. Some of us try it more. Basically, this is the situation. I'm right, you're wrong. And since I'm right, I'm not going to change. Actually, this is politics today too, by the way. The other is saying, I'm right and you're wrong, and I'm not going to change. And so there you go, thinking, I can't change my own mind, but I can change their mind. Now, isn't this bizarre? But this is samsara. This is samsara. I can't change my mind, but I have the power to change your mind and point out how you're wrong. Yeah, there's a reason why there's so much suffering in samsara. And when you start seeing the game, if you start seeing how the pieces work, how the machinery works, then there's a reason why people like the Dalai Lama laugh a lot. Because it really is quite humorous in a way. It's a sad sort of thing because people are deceived thinking that this is all real and the way it should be and da-da-da-da-da. But I'm hoping you're going to leave this weekend realizing that maybe I don't have to take all of this so seriously. So this being a victim is self-perpetuating. And so being a victim creates apathy, resentment, anger, hopelessness, helplessness, and it's just a downward spiral, just like guilt. It just takes you down. Now, the thing is, to compare this with a lump of coal, we think samsara is a diamond. It's supposed to be a diamond. It can be perfected, but in actuality, it's nothing but a lump of coal. So when you are a victim, you're thinking that a lump of coal is a diamond, and when you're blaming yourself, you are thinking a diamond is a lump of coal. Those are the two fundamental mistakes you're making. When I did this at one center, a woman said to me, well, that's interesting because we're both different aspects of carbon. She was a professor.
Yeah.
And so this is what I said. I said, the reason why there's so much stress in samsara is because it takes a lot of heat and pressure to turn a lump of coal into a diamond. You're not laughing. Anyway, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to take this lump of coal, or lump of manure, if you would have it, and turn it to a diamond. The point being that either one of these approaches, blaming ourselves or blaming samsara and the beings in it, are pointless. They lead to giving up our power, to the situation being unworkable, depression, and so on and so forth. That I think we're familiar with these places. Yes?
So, from this, could you say that you can't fix samsara, but we can fix ourselves?
Absolutely. Very well put. And the interesting thing about fixing ourselves is ultimately we're not broke.
Right. So we can clean away all the stuff. We can clean everything up. We can clean it up, and there we are. We're there. We got.
Yeah. Remove the obscurations. There are a lot of different analogies. The lotus is one. And it's got this idea of growth, which I've been kind of coming back to, where you don't fix it, you let it grow.
Okay.
Fix has this idea of control.
Yeah.
Another analogy is the sun and the clouds, that the sun is always shining. Sun is our Buddha nature. It's always shining. And when we can't see it, it's because there's clouds in the way. And the clouds are our confusion. And so it's a matter of if the clouds are removed, the sun automatically shines. The sun does not choose to shine some places and not others. It has no choice about whether it's going to shine or not. You know, it's this idea of equanimity. And so it's allowing this to happen.
Are you going to talk about equanimity more at some point during the weekend?
Probably. I've got a lot to talk about.
You do.
These always are much too short. They're always much too short. I've got another 5 minutes, though. Let me see here. Because what I've got down here is talk a little bit about Buddha nature now. Sometimes it's called the enlightened essence, sometimes a nature of mind, and has lots of different names. But Buddhas and sentient beings have it equally. It's not more in Buddhas and less in sentient beings. It's not a true self or a higher self. They talk about it being the unity of wisdom and space, yin and yeshe. And so with the idea of wisdom is the idea of luminosity. Again, these are just words. And it is really beyond conception. It's beyond words. So this becomes difficult at this point to talk about it. But they also talk about emptiness, compassion, too. Emptiness being that wisdom and space together. Emptiness, remember, emptiness is not voidness. Emptiness is actually full of potential. Anything can arise from emptiness. Anything and everything. Everything that arises from emptiness. And then it returns to emptiness. Yeah, it's saturated with loving kindness and compassion, this Buddha nature. Well, we have lots of practices in Buddhism to help bring it out and develop it, train ourselves to be kinder, more compassionate, and so forth. The seed of that is there and always has been there. And you could say that this is our heritage, the Buddha nature. The Karmapa, in his latest book, The Heart is Noble, talks about it being a noble heart. That all of us have this noble heart. And so this is something that we can feel good about ourselves. Not that we are better than other people, because all beings have it. But this is who we really are, rather than thinking, I am what I do. I am what I have learned. I am my body, or I am my mind, or I am this, or I am that, based on what we've accomplished in samsara. That's not who we are. That this Buddha nature is beginningless and it is endless. And when you talk about beginningless, Buddhism really has a unique approach to time. They have the idea of a kalpa, which is an aeon. And last weekend I led a Nyungne retreat, and some of the prayers in there talked about millions of kalpas before this kalpa. Millions of universes before this universe. That's how long beginningless beginning is. That go back as far as you can possibly imagine, and there still is no beginning. So it's indestructible. Yeah. The only problem is that every single one of those kalpas where we've had an infinite number of lives, we've suffered. That's the only problem. And the way out, of course, is to become enlightened. And then you've freed yourself from suffering, freed yourself from birth and death. Unless you want to come back as a bodhisattva, but bodhisattvas don't suffer. So you've still freed yourself from suffering. So I think that's a good place to end, and we can go to lunch. Do you have dedication prayers with you?
Yeah, I can hand them up.
Okay, we've accumulated some merit. We need to dedicate it. And I would say that while we dedicate this to all beings, that it might be good to dedicate it to, and I could use one too, I don't have these memorized. To dedicate it to Lama's dog too.
And to your father.
Yes, and my father. I'll